I think I got to my role, or my role kind of found me through the product of a couple character traits that I've applied to most things that I do. So the first one's hard work, speaks for itself. Second one is initiative, definitely what I think makes a difference among a lot of people. Critical thinking, a trait that I took for granted until my previous role, and I had to really recruit people who had that skill. I think I maintain a focus on where I want to go, but I remain very open to opportunity or something that I might not expect as it comes along.
Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to another episode of DIB Innovators. Today I'm speaking with Stacy Newstead, CEO at Evolution Energy Solutions. Stacy, thanks for chatting with me today.
Thanks, David. I appreciate you having me on.
You bet. So super excited. I think this will be an interesting podcast with some of the background you have in your company. But to start off, talk about your journey to becoming the CEO of Evolution and what got you to this point.
Yeah, David, I'd be happy to. So I think I'll answer this question two ways. The first way is the way that I think is more interesting as I reflect on my path to be here. And the second way will probably be what more people intend with this question. But I think I got to my role, or my role kind of found me through the product of a couple character traits that I've applied to most things that I do. So the first one's hard work, speaks for itself. Second one is initiative, definitely what I think makes a difference among a lot of people. Critical thinking, a trait that I took for granted until my previous role, and I had to really recruit people who had that skill. I think I maintain a focus on where I want to go, but I remain very open to opportunity or something that I might not expect as it comes along. And then fifth, I think it's important that I have personal or professional goals, but making sure that they align with the company goals, because at the end of the day, that's why you're brought on board to a company, is they have a need, and you have to ensure that you're always fulfilling their needs before you can go ahead and prioritize yours. So it's a little bit of insight into me. I really enjoy understanding what makes people tick and what makes projects successful that are made up of good teams. I think probably what you were intending for me to answer when you asked the question is kind of my path that got me here. I think it was just a couple of smart plus lucky decisions along the way. I am naturally interested in engineering. I think it's fun and exciting. I like things that you can touch and feel and point to and say, I built that, I made that difference. So I studied materials engineering. I picked that track because it had previously been mostly a graduate study program, but as an undergraduate study program, I had a lot of flexibility in picking the coursework. I was very interested in the skate and snowboard culture. I wanted to make snowboards, but I lived in the DC area and wasn't really too keen on moving to Vermont for my first job. So I interviewed with the Department of Defense. I got, again, very lucky on the timing. It was a time when the Department of Defense, unfortunately, we were going to Iraq and Afghanistan, but fortunately, that meant that they had a lot of budget for training. I chose a role because it was with aviation, and I thought helicopters were loud and cool. And it was absolutely just an honor and a pleasure to be working alongside active duty military. I did not grow up in a military family, and the mentoring that is part of that community, the professionalism was, I just think, I can't say enough about how it helped me foundationally at the beginning of my career. I was working in a test and evaluation role, which what that meant is you had equipment that was already designed, built, gone through most of its testing, was probably in low rate production. And we were assessing it as engineers from the user's perspective. But it felt a little bit like consumer reports, right? You read consumer reports, it says, hey, this car's already been built. Here's what it does well. Here's what it doesn't do well. So I'm a traditional engineer. I said, well, I could have made this better in the beginning. So then I sought out a role in design and manufacturing where I could really impact the product before it had gotten past the point of already have been, somebody saying, we're buying it. It's got to roll off the production line. So that brought me to a company. It was called AAI. Now it's owned by Textron, and they made the Shadow unmanned aerial vehicle. It was one of the early ISR reconnaissance unmanned aerial vehicles. That was really cool to work with people who just had an amazing mission in mind and were pumping things out to the field in active conflict scenarios. From there, I think I made an interesting decision where I said, I want to try managing people and getting into business development. And, I loved project management. So I made that change. Turns out they're so very different things, managing people and managing projects. But in the role that was a company called Alliance Science and Technology. Now it's owned by Huntington Ingalls Industries. So it's HII Mission Technologies. That's what got me into critical minerals and supply chain work. We talked a little bit earlier, David, that's where you're really trying to dig down in a supply chain and map out a supply chain of what materials are required to make the shiny element. And we talked about, you make an Apache helicopter in the US, and that pilot who flies it might be using night vision goggles that might have a tourmaline gem material in it that comes from an artisanal mine somewhere in Africa. So it was really spending a lot of time illuminating supply chains, understanding where you had risks in those supply chains, understanding factors that drove technologies and industries overseas, understanding factors that made it hard for those sectors to be successful in the US. And then about a year and a half ago, this opportunity came up, and I decided I was ready to return to being a practitioner rather than advisory. And so I said, why not? Let's give it a try and test out some of the solutions that I've proposed.
Very cool. And yeah, what a neat background. And supply chains are tough. I mean, so this is why it's exciting. It's going to be a fun conversation with this. So talk to us about Evolution Energy Solutions. How did it come about for you? What is it actually doing and its mission?
Yes. So Evolution Energy Solutions is a subsidiary of Evolution Energy Minerals. So that's kind of where the story starts, is at the parent company. Evolution Energy Minerals is an Australian-owned company, publicly traded on the TSX under the ticker EV1. And Evolution Energy Minerals owns a natural graphite mine, which technically, as we talked about before, also it's technically called a project before it's in commissioning, but most of us who aren't familiar with mining would refer to it as a natural graphite mine, but I'll use the term project. So Evolution Energy Minerals has a natural graphite project located in Tanzania in Africa. And when you think about natural graphite in the ground, the majority of it is in flake form. So think about a bowl of cornflakes or a bowl of Raisin Bran. You've got different size flakes. The really big flakes are called coarse flakes. And that stuff, you pull it out of the ground, you concentrate it just a little bit, sells for a very high price, right out of, right in a concentrate form, or for most of us, out of the ground. You've got those smaller flakes are called fine flakes, and they don't sell for very much, just in concentrate. But those fine flakes are what's used in batteries. And so if you process those fine flakes into battery material, battery graphite, that's where you're really going to see more of a profit on that value add product. So Evolution Energy Minerals decided, in today's world, where you've got legislation such as the Inflation Reduction Act, incentivizing sectors who are controlled by the Chinese to stand up outside of China and preferably in North America. Evolution Energy Minerals said there's a business case for us to bring our fine flakes to the US for processing into anode material. So they were looking for somebody to run their US operation, or their aspirations to be a North American supplier of anode material. That's how Evolution Energy Minerals and I came in contact with each other. So Evolution Energy Solutions was set up as a US subsidiary, and that's the company that I run.
For those that don't know, talk to me about batteries and graphite. Like, how does that go together? And, are these batteries used, that whole journey?
So graphite's used in a lot of different applications, very much in industrial applications. But the one that's getting a lot of attention right now is graphite's used in lithium ion batteries. So if you think of a lithium ion battery, you have anodes and cathodes in batteries. In a lithium ion battery, graphite's primarily used for anode. A battery is 1/3 by mass graphite. So right now you have a lot of conversation about some of the metals that go in batteries, lithium. You can Google some really interesting graphics that show how little lithium compared to graphite by mass is in a battery, but it's the pricing of these materials that give it attention. So lithium had a huge price spike years ago, and that drew a lot of attention to that raw material input, saying the pricing change in lithium could really affect the price of a battery, and so on if you're using a battery in an EV. Graphite by mass is used significantly more than some of these more expensive metals. Was typically not talked about as much, but it's being talked about more simply because you can have synthetic graphite or natural graphite. In natural graphite, 100% of the graphite that's processed for batteries is coming from China right now. And for synthetic, pretty much about the same when you're talking about graphite applications for batteries. So it is a significant supply chain risk if you're talking about foreign dependency. So Evolution Energy Minerals, Evolution Energy Solutions, we decided that we were going to focus on the, processing graphite for lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. And a lot of this had to do with the business opportunity that the Inflation Reduction Act created and the projected growth in the market with electric vehicle demand. Yeah, there's a lot of challenges to it. That's the link. I think I'll stop for there for now.
So what is the Inflation Act? Can you go a little bit more into how that act specifically affects?
So the Inflation Reduction Act accomplishes many things, but as it relates to electric vehicles and batteries, it was saying that there's certain tax credits that are out there for producers, but the one that really is getting the attention is there's a tax credit for consumers, for people who buy electric vehicles, because I think the majority of automakers in the US government appreciate that other than the early adopters, most Americans are saying, well, I wouldn't mind buying an EV, forget range anxiety and charging stations. Let's put that aside for now. But most Americans are saying, if I've decided I want to go buy a car and I get to the lot and they tell me I can buy an ICE, an internal combustion engine, like a traditional car, or I can buy an EV and they're the same price, there's a good portion of Americans that would decide to buy the EV, right? Moving forward in technology. So the Inflation Reduction Act has a tax credit called the 30D Consumer Tax Credit. And it says that if the materials you use in your EV are not from certain countries or not from companies that are owned by certain countries, your vehicle will qualify for that tax credit. So now you have an EV manufacturer, right? And I'm not going to name names, but you can take a major EV manufacturer who then now goes to their battery manufacturer and say, you better not use any materials that are either produced in China, Russia, Iran, or North Korea, or don't use any materials that are produced by companies that are majority owned by one of those countries. Well, back up to when I said how much graphite is coming from China, right? 100% of the graphite used in these batteries is coming from China. So now what? You say, okay, well, now there's a business case for ex-China supply, non-Chinese owned companies to start getting into this business.
Right. So you guys then act as the intermediary of getting the graphite so that you can.
No, not the intermediary, because this is the thing, right? You don't want to just be a shell company. You don't want to be a pass-through for the current situation. So it's a matter of how do you bring that technology in-house? So if you start learning about what I'll call aspiring graphite anode producers, right? And there's a lot of them now. They either have their own in-house processing technology that they're using. So there's the technology to concentrate the graphite at the mine, but really what is the art is the technology to take the graphite and purify and shape it and size it so that it becomes anode material. And whether you're talking about natural graphite or synthetic graphite, it's a science and an art, and it's something that China as a country has set their mind to becoming dominant in. And so they have spent money and years standing up that capability. So if you're going to be a supplier of the anode material, you have to have that ability to do the processing. So you're either developing your own technology, and there are completely non-Chinese novel technologies that are being proven, or the path that Evolution was choosing to take is to partner with the number one supplier right now. It's a Chinese company, and do a tech transfer with them, right? And this is something that we talked about. Is some people's views are you can't do any business with Chinese companies. I see it as, if you're going to be developing a new technology, consider what goes into that. Consider the R&D, the time and the money, the knowledge that you need. You have to prove the technology. You have to scale it up. You have to build pilot plants. You have to build your commercial scale plant. That's a certain amount of time. And right, history shows it took China 10 to 15 years to perfect that. It's also certain technologies cost more than others, right? So at the end of that, are you going to be cost competitive? Because behind the scenes, businesses are still driven by cost and still look for lowest price. And then what often is not widely known is the length of time it takes to qualify your graphite anode material into a battery. And that can take 5 to 10 years. And when you're talking about qualification, right, that's also time and money. So if I went up to a battery producer right now and said, hey, I know you're getting material that you like from China that works very, very well and is very low cost. I'd like you to try my stuff. Now I'm asking that battery manufacturer to assign resources, spend money, spend people on testing my stuff. And how do they know it's going to be worthwhile for them? And then consider the safety implications of swapping out material, right? Batteries, lithium ion batteries, especially, a lot of discussion on safety on them. Car companies, right? They can't sacrifice reliability, quality, and safety. So there's a lot that goes into becoming a player in this game, and evolution is choosing to fill a need by saying, let's take proven technology that these cell manufacturers like using and bring it to the US. And you're not just bringing jobs, right? Like everybody talks about, oh, our plant's going to have 300 jobs or something like that. You're bringing the knowledge and you're now beginning to learn that knowledge. You're bringing it to the US. You're creating a reason for universities to have a path of study, because when you go to school, well, some people start study things like art history, right? With no career, no job at the end of it, right? But other people, their parents say, I'm not paying unless you have a job coming out of this, right? So students being able to say, well, I would love to work in this industry, so therefore I'll study it, right? But people are not studying graphite purification for commercial scale battery production because that industry didn't really exist in the US before.
That's interesting. So in the tech transfer kind of agreement, they're giving tech, are we bringing Chinese nationalists over here to work on that technology as well? Or how does that work? And what do they get in return?
So there's certain national security aspects that I navigate in the US, right? So the Inflation Reduction Act says in order for a car to qualify for this tax credit, and the tax credit is important because it creates the monetary business case for this. Your company cannot have certain participants in ownership. We have to limit investment. So we have to be very careful how much we let this Chinese company hold board seats, invest money, have ownership, right? There's explicit rules that we have to follow. And that is really hard because these companies could infuse a significant amount of capital, but we said, no, we can't take your money because that would totally negate what we're trying to accomplish here in the US from a national security perspective. So the Inflation Reduction Act gives me very, well, not quite black and white, but almost black and white rules for me to follow. CFIUS, the Committee for Foreign Investment in the US, they have the ability to block certain business transactions. It's a US government agency. So they don't have hard and fast rules about what you can and can't do, but there's certain things that would raise your level of risk on CFIUS coming in and blocking that business transaction. So I have to make sure I'm constantly assessing our investment and ownership in our tech transfer agreements against the CFIUS kind of sliding scale of risk that they'll block our transaction. And then the third thing is just the political environment. So we had done site selection activity where we said these are the 3 states that we think are most desirable for us to build our plant in. These are the locales within those states. And back in November, I met with those states and I met with those community leaders to say, would you be accepting of this project? Here's the ownership that we're thinking about limiting our Chinese partner to. Here's our approach. Here's just our awareness as a company of what we're doing and how it could impact things in the future. So all of those aspects I have to navigate. What is extremely helpful is my background was constantly looking at the risk of foreign dependence and how foreign countries and companies could control our access to supply. So one of the, I guess, phrases that I say to my Australian parent company is we always have to be able to tell the story about how our operations will be uninterrupted when China invades Taiwan.
And you're able to prove that, or you have the use case.
Yeah,
Right?
so that's where you kind of you look at your flow and you make sure that it's under your control. So for example, the graphite in Tanzania, what's the path of that graphite to get to the plant in North America? Who pays, like what's the financial?
What is that path? Just talk for again. I think this.
Put it on a boat and sail it across the ocean. But it's like making sure that we're not selling our graphite to our Chinese technology partner and then them selling it back to our plant. So you're following the path of the widget or the product or the raw material, and you're actually looking at the logistics of that path, and you're looking at the financial transactions of that path to make sure that Australia, Tanzania, and the US are maintaining control in all of those steps.
Well, just for clarification, so when you said all of this, the graphite's processed in China, like 99%, or you're now taking that so it doesn't have to go to China.
Yes.
And we're doing it outside of, nothing has to go to China.
Yeah.
But in order to be successful and meet that need and reduce the supply chain risk, you have to use Chinese technology.
Yes.
That's the relationship. What does China get back by giving you this?
Money. And this is where we joked that I live in two worlds at the same time, so when I have my meetings with my defense colleagues, right, sometimes it's just like mic drop and conversation ender, but I'm like, yeah, we just inked this memorandum of understanding with a Chinese technology partner. So the US could take two paths, right? They could say we don't want any Chinese involvement at all. And then the US consumer can go without access to some of these things for a period of time until the US is able to learn this technology on our own, commercialize it. It would definitely help in the funding scenario because now there's 100% of business case for funding an ex-China company, but there's going to be an interruption, right? So if you want to buy a Tesla tomorrow, you wouldn't be able to. So is the American consumer willing to wait X many years for a solution that doesn't touch China in any way? Alternatively, we can say the US market is a large enough market that China doesn't want to ignore it. And we could say, we'll give you access to our market with limitations. So you will be able to share in the profits, but these are the conditions under which you can share in the profits. And that's where I think you have a real divide in the conversation is some people say no money should be flowing back to the CCP. I can understand that argument. But then, okay, will you do without the things? I mean, how many people go to work and have these discussions and then go home and buy something from Amazon that was made in China? So,
well, I mean, like the same argument, I'd be curious your take. We kind of talked about, but everyone wants EVs because it's better for our Mother Earth.
Yeah.
But talk to me, like from a battery perspective and getting this all out. What does it take to make a battery? Because I've heard this of like, yeah, there's a bunch of coal being used, but like, what is the process that, from both mining and the labor and.
Yeah. So there's an organization called SAFE that's a player in this space, and they have put together these, I think they've done two kind of a webinar, but it's like a panel that they've recorded. And it's really about understanding China's approach, because that's also part of the conversation, right? If we're going to go to economic battle with China, you have to understand your opponent, right? And you have to tweak your playbook to account for their methods. And I do not think that as a country legislative, we have done so yet. We kind of seem to be saying, well, that's not fair, and waiting for them to decide to follow our rules. I mean, if you equate it to athletics, would any opponent do it the whole way? So credit to Safe for this panel where this expert kind of gave this example is a lot of the whole reason we're pushing this electrification of vehicles and this energy transition is there's a national security aspect. So no matter what your feels are about climate change, there is a national security aspect where you don't want the same reliance on other countries that we currently have in our supply chains today. Or if you subscribe to the importance of its effect on climate, you're buying an electric vehicle because it's better for the climate. Currently, the graphite anodes that are produced in China, whether they be synthetic or whether they be natural, are produced typically using coal-fired power. So now you're buying a car that you think is helping the environment, but for the manufacturer of that car, you're having to pollute the environment. So I think that's something that is also tough to understand because you have to really seek out that information. And then it's a tough problem to solve because there are options for clean, green, renewable power. Is the American consumer willing to pay a price premium for ESG? It hasn't been demonstrated yet. And I think you could say the same thing for the US government, right? You'll have a roundtable on how we need to get off foreign reliance of critical minerals and how we have to buy from secure sources. And down the hall in that same building is a meeting of acquisition executives talking about we need to bring down the price of these nuts and bolts that we're buying.
Yep, absolutely. Well, where does Evolution Energy fit into like the national defense side of our supply chain, and where is it critical to have this capability?
Okay, so kind of in two ways, right? So defense uses lithium ion batteries, right? So you want to have a secure source of supply for the graphite that goes into the batteries that are used by defense. But I think also that EES contributes to acquisition practices and national security for defense in a couple ways. So for acquisition practices, even though I talked about pursuing the commercial electric vehicle market, in the Department of Defense, there's a lot of discussion on how defense can bring down the price of some of the batteries that they use. So typically that's done by leveraging COTS. So if defense is buying the same thing that the commercial market is buying, you can take advantage of the lower cost of the commercial market, right? Because typically if it's a defense unique item, the quantity you're purchasing is too small to really have buying power. And you can't sacrifice the performance requirements. So you're kind of stuck with the price that is commanded for that item. But if it's a secure decision to use the same lithium ion battery in a defense pieces of equipment that's being used in a commercial EV, then you get to leverage, the power of the commercial buying market to bring down those prices. I think there's lots of examples of where you have manufacturers who were making stuff for the commercial market and making stuff for the defense market, and they chose to exit the defense market because the money was in the commercial market and that they couldn't survive catering to the defense needs. So I think that's where defense will benefit on the improvement of sourcing and technology for commercially used lithium ion batteries that defense can make use of. From a national security perspective, onshoring a technology, taking a technology that China has a stronghold over right now and bringing that to North America, to our continent, right? Like, it may not be the perfect way to transition back to your point about what Chinese nationals are we allowing at the plant, where could they insert control? But if it's done in a responsible, deliberate way, you're reducing the risk until the US can totally leapfrog China in technology and beyond that, the US has the capability to leapfrog China in technology. We can do quite a bit if we set our mind to it. So onshoring a technology that currently resides in China under Chinese control. And then the second way is we're, integrating with our allies, right? The parent company is Australian, the graphite projects in Tanzania. Right now, for critical minerals, you have Chinese companies buying up all the critical minerals assets in Africa. And they're winning over the African population by doing very high visibility projects like we'll pay for improving your port, we'll build your road, right? And now the US and Australia has the opportunity to do that. And I'll give another credit to Lieutenant General Paul Ostrowski was talking about the importance of winning over hearts and minds on the battlefield, right? Like, because at the end of the day, if in your everyday life you see, look what Evolution Energy did to improve my daily life, and they're an Australian company with the US partner, that's helpful for the US long term.
Yeah, it's a great perspective. Well, as I was just thinking about, I normally think of adversaries, China,
Yeah.
stealing our IP, stealing, getting themselves where they can, critically impact national security. But this is almost backwards. This is almost, even though we're paying for it,
Yeah.
whether or not they're, because you're not getting access into, other than just basic requirements of batteries, into our national defense side, but you're creating a product that they need. So it's not like
Yeah.
the infusion of that's an adversary into our, letting them get into something is very low risk, it appears.
Yeah, well, I mean, nothing's like low risk when you're playing with these stakes, right? But this is
Sure.
a really interesting point. So, a lot of our laws and our concerns with China stealing IP, you can think of submarine technology, where we're 10 to 15 years ahead of them in submarine technology. And then the product that you'd be making with that technology would be the product that we'd be making with that technology would be directly used against us in a time of war, right? Now, take battery or graphite processing technology. They're 10 to 15 years ahead of us. What are they going to steal from us that they don't already know? And how can they use that technology against us by restricting supply, restricting access? And then I think that it brings up kind of two questions, which I find interesting dinner table conversation, but not necessarily everybody's cup of tea to kind of think through these topics. If you have a common enemy, you unite for a short period of time to achieve that immediate goal, and then you disband. But if you have a common purpose, not a common purpose, but if you're both going to get something out of it, you might stick together a little longer. So if we were to tie each other's money up a little bit differently because they have an investment in the US. And if you look at how China became dominant in some other sectors, the Chinese market's too large for us to ignore from a revenue perspective. And so China says, okay, you can come here, but under these rules, and you have to give us access to your IP. So why not do it the same? And like I said, nothing's low risk in this conversation, and I want to be cognizant of not speaking outside of my area's expertise, but what has been so interesting in this world of studying supply chains and market dynamics is what you learn as an analyst from the outside versus what you learn when you're a practitioner on the inside as to how decisions are really made. And so the other aspect is, right, once I get the Chinese technology on to the North American continent, right, and now we're making the recipe like this company taught us to do, right? Because you're not going to change the recipe when you bring it over, because now that introduces technical risk to your customers. All right, anytime you change over supplier, you want as few changes as possible. Well, so now I have two challenges. One is if I follow kind of national security practices and make an at arm's length technology transfer deal and say, just give me the recipe, stay out of my plant. The R&D infrastructure that China has for this technology is amazing. We do not have that in the US. So they're just going to be ahead of us again in a couple years because they're going to give me today's product, but they're already working on tomorrow's product. So in a world where the geopolitical situation is not what it is today, I would want to maintain that collaborative relationship and continue to reap the benefits of their R&D. Alternatively, once I have this technology in the North American continent and our plants up and running and we're producing, we as a company are going to want to continue to make R&D advancements. So there's going to be some IP that does eventually get generated. And that's what I think the US wants to ensure to protect. Interesting conversation there, because perhaps some of the improvements that I make sense from an environmental regulation perspective. And there isn't really the business case for the Chinese to want to make that same change. But if it's helpful for the environment, wouldn't we want that to go back to other parts of the world as well?
Absolutely. So does Evolution work directly? Do you sell to the US government in the supply chain, or are you just creating batteries or your plan is to produce, the materials to create batteries. The batteries then will be
So
purchased by the U.S. government.
So for Evolution's, Evolution Energy Minerals parent company, Evolution Energy Solutions, the subsidiary. So Evolution Energy Solutions would be selling to the commercial electric vehicle market. So our customers would be your, what we call in the industry, tier one battery producers, right? Your Tesla, Samsung, Panasonic,
Mhm.
LG, SK on. So not directly to the government. But for graphite, and you have the same story about foreign dependency for graphite for other applications. There are certain applications that the US government does not buy graphite or graphite products. They buy products that use graphite in them. So it's kind of like in the supply chain modeling world, you call it embedded demand. So there are companies out there that have graphite processing technology that are directly working with the Department of Defense. They have like grant projects to do proof of concept or demonstration projects. So
How
in summary, some graphite companies will be doing business directly with the Department of Defense. Evolution's current plan of action is not to do that initially, but for the Department of Defense to still benefit from Evolution's activities.
how did the local where you're looking to put plants? How did they respond?
They responded very well because again, what's
Jobs.
jobs. I think, people love to believe in a good story, but jobs, votes, money make the world go round. Do you want a more PC answer? They
Oh
welcome
no.
the opportunity to stand up.
Well, no, I was wondering if there was like pushback, like we don't want part of this because are you using coal then to
No.
create this?
So that's part of the criteria for when you're doing site selection. And if you look up other aspiring graphic producers' media announcements, and you kind of read between the lines, for both processing of natural graphite and synthetic graphite, you require a lot of power. So you care about your power being cost effective. And then, Evolution has a net zero carbon footprint goal.
Hmm.
So we are trying to find every way possible to ensure that we're reaching that goal and moving towards that goal. So then you're going to look for clean, green, renewable energy. And, just interesting note, that's also was a priority for our Chinese technology partner as they were they're doing global expansion. They have plants in China, but they're globally expanding. So those were criteria for them as well. Yeah, we will not be using coal power. And then the nice thing is some of these states, if they don't already have renewable sources of energy, they know that that's where they need to make investments. And there's also whole conferences going on about how do we increase the grid to account for increasing demand of electricity that's coming with this whole energy transition and electrification.
Very cool. How about 5 years? Where are you going to be? Where's the state of your company?
Pass, because I think that
You can't pass.
well, here's why I can pass, right? Well, I'll tell you why I'd like to pass, because I think what's going to be incredibly important is the next year. So if you look at graphite pricing over the last 6 months, and when prices are low, stock prices are low, which makes fundraising incredibly hard. The amount of work that you would do to raise $10 million results in significantly a lower number. And if a whole nother podcast, you can learn about why prices are depressed. But in defense, when you're talking about developing new technology and commercializing a product, they talk about the valley of death, right?
Yep.
Getting it from the lab scale to the commercial production. I would say in the critical minerals world, it's this equity funding to get to production that's going to be the valley of death for many companies. I mean, you can see it's a big conversation right now with lithium. Like in a mine, let's say you discover a deposit, right? And it's going to be like 15 years before that mine's commissioned, which means producing and selling. We have 3 more years to go in that process, and we are trying to fundraise for those last 3 years. And in a perfect world, if you had all the money, we could be building the anode plant at the same time that we're finishing the mine and be ready to go at the same time. But because the funding environment is so challenging, we have said we absolutely must focus on raising money to bring that mine into production because it's the foundation of how we can be vertically integrated and therefore cost competitive with the Chinese partners. Because the Chinese company that we are trying to, finalize this tech transfer deal, they want that mine in production because they want to use the graphite for their Indonesian plant until our plant's up and running. So our trading card is producing natural graphite. So right now it's like all hands on deck, everything we can do to finance the remaining tasks on the mine for the next 3 years. And this traces back to when I say we have to understand if we're trying to go up against China as our competitor of sales, we have to understand their practices. We can't just wish they had the same as ours, right? The US approaches it more free market-ish, and China says we will be dominant in this market.
They will pay to do it.
Yeah, the US government they've got some pretty amazing, DOE has an amazing loan program that's just really something to be talked about in terms of the work that they're doing. They've got some grant programs. If you look at the hoops that companies have to jump through in order to even apply, right? Not even win, but apply, the amount of money and time it takes to apply versus look at what Morocco is doing. Morocco said, we want to be a player in the electric sector, right? And do they have the same process for companies to go get funding? And are those companies in Morocco getting a government subsidy or a loan? So I think the US needs to decide, do we want this sector, let's just say graphite processing or battery materials, do we want it to be geographically located out of China? Because that's happening already. Do we want ownership to be non-Chinese? That's not exactly happening. And do we want it to end up on the North American continent? That quite isn't exactly flourishing yet. Is the legislation really, if you walk it backwards into practice, is it really accomplishing the goal? Is it structured to enable the goal that you want it to accomplish?
Yeah, those are tough problems for sure.
That's why I watch a lot of reality TV at night. I don't sleep.
Well, I know. I mean, these are just
light joke.
Yeah, it shares light though on just how challenging and intertwined all these are. So
Yeah.
you're also a member of NDIA
Yes.
National Defense Industry Association. Share a little bit about,
I also love that part of my day. So most of my career has been directly involved with defense, whether it was a DoD civilian or working in DoD products or DoD services. And just through that work, I got involved in National Defense Industry Association. I started calling into this committee called the Supply Chain Networks Committee because I was very involved in supply chains at the time. And that committee kind of pulled me in, again, back to the defense culture, the active duty culture. And where it brought me is now I'm the secretary of the manufacturing division, and the leadership and motivation of NDIA is great right now. The membership is awesome. And so the manufacturing division is really working hard to engage with DoD. And one of our reasons for that is there's been a lot of progress between industry and DoD on recognizing some of our challenges, but industry would like to be part of developing the solutions. So those solutions are really implementable and sustainable.
That's great. Great organization too. So
yeah, the manufacturing division will be having an in-person meeting in DC in November. The past few have been great. The size is just perfect for engaging with the speakers and networking. And if you can't tell, I get very energized by my involvement. I think the mission is incredibly important. And it
absolutely
drives me.
Yeah, we're a member as well and big fans of, how they're trying to support, really the warfighters and national security. Super important.
Yeah.
Well, Stacy, this has been fascinating. I've learned so much. I really appreciate it, but we're gonna have to wrap it up. Before we go, if someone wants to follow you or your company, Evolution, or NDIA, how best would they link into you?
Fantastic. So For me, if you want to contact me, LinkedIn's a good way to reach out to me. Evolution Energy Minerals. You can find us online. There's an opportunity to connect online. Again, that's evolutionenergyminerals.com.au. And again, Australian ownership. And through that website, you can find our downstream approach in Evolution Energy Solutions. NDIA, great the website's a super easy way to get in contact. I'll definitely plug the manufacturing division, but there's a lot of very active divisions. And then near term, I'll be at the Battery Show in Detroit, Michigan in October. If you are interested at all in cars and EVs, it's the expo floor will blow your mind. Super cool conference. That's in October. And then later October, I'll be in Williamsburg at a conference for obsolescence. It's IIOM. And I'll be talking about this whole topic of, if I manage to bring the technology here, what's the infrastructure that I have to continue to stay in pace or ahead of China, or do they have the R&D infrastructure to make what I onshored obsolete in a couple of years?
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks so much. I appreciate it, Stacy. I learned a lot, and let's stay in touch.
Thank you.